Okay, so I'm actually very curious because some of this I'm not sure if it's just a phenomena that I'm seeing more in kind of North America, or whether you see a similar type of dynamic here, just because the global economics is getting a little crazy right now. Um, have you ever had this situation where your CEO or a senior leader or something like that asked you to help improve productivity? So how many people have dealt with that question? And um, and in the last 1 to 3 months, it's always. So I'm curious about that because this started to ramp up a lot in my experience. And so one question is like, this is happening more in the US at least. And like the question is why? I would say because interest rates went up a lot, which means the borrowing costs became higher because the interest rates went higher, which means I call this money isn't cheap anymore, which means that you start getting asked by everyone, hey, how do you improve productivity? Because they don't want to spend money because it's not cheap to borrow. This graph, I don't even know, has anyone seen a graph like this before? So this is looking at US interest rates from 1955 to 2022 approximately. If you see right here, there's this kind of period of time around 2008 to 2017 where interest rates, at least in the US, was approximately zero. It means you could borrow money and it's free. Like you go, oh, what do I have to pay back? Almost nothing. So you just borrow as much as you can and then you just buy lots of things, including hiring a lot of people, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody cared about productivity because your cost of borrowing money is so low, it just doesn't matter. That has changed. See this big little spike up there? So that kind of behavior has shifted and we're seeing this kind of new attitude toward productivity. One thing I want to point out though is Agile showed up around here. So kind of main point is that interest rates around here were significantly higher than this zero period, about a little bit even higher than what we see today too. So the idea here is that all the things we talk about in terms of Agile, lean, etc., they're not like a result of low interest rates. They don't require that environment. They should be effective in this higher interest rate, more productivity focused era. So I did look at, hey, that's the US. So what are the interest rates in India? And my conclusion is just, it's always more expensive in India to borrow money. It's always been more expensive. It didn't hit it. Like you don't see that kind of on the bottom floor thing. So this is why I was curious. Is like, you probably get asked this question all the time anyway. So it's always been expensive. You can't just rely on it being cheap. There was this kind of period of time right on here though, like maybe back then 2004-ish, maybe people didn't talk about it as much, but for the most part, it kind of stayed the same. Okay, so my kind of point here is that lean and agile should matter more, not less, when money isn't cheap. So when people are concerned about productivity, our lean, agile principles, practice, etc., should actually be more relevant, not less relevant. But you need to talk about it in a particular way. So you have to frame our knowledge in a way that appeals to people that are concerned about productivity. So to do that, I'm going to cover 4 trendy but bad ideas about productivity and how us as an Agile community should talk and frame these things instead. There's 4, which I'll go through. 1, that you can't measure productivity. 2, that developer experience is equivalent to productivity. It'll be interesting when we have the developer experience day, what they talk about. 3, that platforms automatically improve productivity. And 4, that AI automatically improves productivity. How many people have heard these ideas before? Okay. They're pretty trendy right now. But I would say they're wrong. And I don't think you should talk about them that way. So bad idea number 1 is that you can't measure productivity. A lot of this came from, like I kind of learned this from, there's an article that Martin Fowler wrote called You Can't Measure Productivity. If you actually read the article, it's not actually about you not being able to measure productivity. It's about something else. I've argued about Martin. I don't like that title. So one thing that is true, you can measure productivity in many ways that are bad. They're not useful. I think even Bjarte's talk kind of alluded to some of them, like you're paying attention to the wrong things that don't really make sense. So measuring productivity, if you measure productivity in terms of how much you work or how many lines of code you produce or how many story points you produce or how many Pull requests is kind of a more recent one. All these things aren't really useful or valuable when you're talking about productivity. And there's a particular pattern that I want to highlight for why those are bad productivity measures. Using this kind of logic. So when we think about what we are doing as software product development, we're engaging activities, which is effort, to build features, which is output, that cause changes in customer behaviors, outcomes that eventually lead to value to the organization, whatever that might be. So typically that's money, but depending on the type of organization, you may define that differently. So here's a graphical way of showing this. Comes from an article from Kent Beck and Gergely Orosz. So you got effort, activities leading to output, features to outcome, customer behavior to impact, value to organization. Easier way to see it. Bad productivity measures only measure the first two circles there, right? They're looking at effort and they're looking at output. They're typically not looking at outcomes. They're not looking at impact. And that's kind of almost like the trick. Oh, is this a good productivity measure? Well, you're just looking at effort and output. You don't have anything else, and that's a problem. Good productivity measures will be looking at effort and impact. You probably will also be looking at output and outcome, but for the most part, you're emphasizing the things at the end. Because really, when we're talking about productivity, especially when you have an executive, CEO, senior leader talk about productivity, they don't care about those. They sometimes do. The really effective ones know the full thing, but at least they're going to be talking about this, which is value of impact over cost of effort, because they're thinking from an overall company perspective. We invested so much money, which is kind of cost, effort, labor, costs, etc. And then we're getting something, revenue, whatever, that will show up. And then we can say, hey, there's actually some compound financial metrics like return on invested capital, stuff like that, where you go, that's essentially what you're talking about here. So when an executive, a senior leader is talking about productivity, they're thinking about this. So when we talk about productivity, we also want to be reflecting that. Okay? So I would say as well is that understanding the value of impact and the cost of effort, it's not actually a new idea or perspective from our community. How many people are familiar with impact mapping or stuff like this? So user story mapping is similar kind of thing. So the idea is that we go, hey, here's a goal. Here's the person, actor associated with that goal. This is what we expect to see. Like if we're successful, this is sort of the impact we're going to see. Unfortunately, they use impact here, and I would not call this impact. I would call that outcome, but whatever. And then deliverables like, hey, what are we building to allow an actor to do something which would then give us the goal? So in the language I'm using, goals actually impact here is outcome, so which is confusing. But the main idea is that you're mapping out all the steps. So you're not just building stuff. We understand all the things that change in order to create the overall outcome. Okay, so that's one thing. So this has been, and impact mapping has been around for like years. So not new. Another thing, which I don't know, this was like back in the day, we talked about this all the time about stable teams and how it made it easier for you to estimate effort because you didn't have to go, oh, how many people worked on this? You would just say, this team has 10 people. How much did it cost? Is, well, 10 people times whatever they cost to their salaries or whatever, or their time and materials, like cost per hour, whatever. So stable teams always made it easier to calculate costs. You would just say, oh, I have this team. I know how big it is. I know how much it costs. And I know how, if I'm good at assessing how well that product or project did in terms of outcomes, then I could just say, oh, there's my productivity. I can check that. And this was an argument we made all the time. This is why we wanted stable teams. At least one part of it was, makes the costs calculation much more predictable, easier to do, etc. So there's this kind of framing of, we could talk about this when someone talks about productivity. We could talk about, stable teams help you measure productivity more easily, more effectively, and go, okay, that now we're talking a similar language. Okay, so summary here is that impact mapping and similar mapping activities help us understand value of impact, and stable teams help us calculate cost of effort more easily. So I can talk about those things that are just kind of like agile techniques, but now they're framed within this structure of, oh, I'm interested in productivity. Okay, let me tell you how our stuff connect with that. So now they're interested. Okay, so instead of you can't measure productivity. So if you have a CEO, senior leader say, hey, I'm interested in productivity, never respond with you can't measure productivity. That's not a good idea. Let's say that's a very career limiting answer to provide. Instead, you can talk about, hey, here's how our things relate. So you can emphasize measuring productivity based on impact, not effort or outputs, which may need to happen because sometimes people go there because it's easier sometimes. But once you go, oh yeah, of course, I care more about impact, how much impact we're getting to the organization, like we make more money or make more whatever. Of course, I care more about that. So let's talk about that. And if you want to talk about that, let's talk about it. And that helps. Okay, so bad idea number 2. Developer experience is equivalent to productivity. This is somewhat trendy right now. That's I almost think just a few vendors are kind of pushing this, and it's kind of got big. So big trend right now when people talk productivity, they say, hey, developer experience is really important. It's so trendy that we even have an entire day at this conference about it. Super trendy. Okay, now what does that mean? They're talking about when you look at productivity, you want to be concerned about the personal perception. So what is the human experience of productivity? And this is like, how do developers feel about, think about, and value their work? Which some aspect I go, that's not wrong. It is important to understand developer experience because it can be a leading indicator of productivity problems. If you say, hey, our productivities, our numbers are up, so we have a lot of impact for like very little cost, but all your developers hate their job, they just want to quit, you are very likely going to see a problem at some point. It's kind of a leading indicator. It's very hard to say, hey, all the people who work at this place hate themselves, but our productivities are numbered. There's no way you're going to sustain that. It's not going to happen. So it's useful to understand this, but it's not equivalent. So just because developers or employees are saying, hey, we have a great work experience, doesn't mean that it's equivalent to productive. There are the kind of things of, hey, we got a ping pong table and I'm playing games all day long and I feel really great about work. And that doesn't mean you're productive. It just means you're messing around. And we know from our community, there's been a lot of old lessons that highlight the difference between this is kind of weird and doesn't necessarily feel comfortable the first time you try it, but it is more productive. So this, I don't know if people seen this kind of thing before. I think Mary probably uses it a lot as like multitasking type thing. So, hey, if someone asks me to do something and I say yes every time, I never say no. It feels great. I say yes, 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 yes. Everyone loves me, but we know that's not good, right? It messes up. Like you get all this slicing stuff, all this kind of context switching. Feels great both for you and your customer until you actually look at the productivity and go, oh wow, I'm just slower at everything, but everyone feels good about it. So now we have this. That's kind of a known distinction. We know that. So it's not. We can't say that. Hey, better experience means more productive. Another one. This is actually quite a relatively popular one. People talk about, hey, I don't want to have a lot of interruptions. Oh, I think something's kicking in. Don't want to have a lot of interruptions, all this kind of stuff. Now, there's a thing we should talk a lot about of you can always be faster if it doesn't have to work kind of thing. And so if you don't ever check that what you're building like passes the tests or satisfies the customer, it'll feel great. You build something and it feels like everything you're building is great because you never check. So you never interrupt yourself to see if you're going down the right path. It feels great, but it's not good. This is like why we have all these feedback loops, because we want to check to say, oh, wait a minute. I didn't check. All of a sudden people are correcting. But in the long run, that's obviously better. We want to build the right if you focus just purely on what feels faster, easier, just from a pure experience perspective, you're going to get misled into not learning things. Because every time we learn a new thing, it's going to feel a little bit worse, at least initially. And then maybe it feels better later, but that's why we want to keep those two things distinct. So my kind of point here is that not that you don't want to pay attention to developer experience, it's just that you have to keep those two things separate. You have to follow both. So you pay attention to developer experience because could be a leading indicator of a problem, but you need to also look at productivity as a kind of a key separate thing. One doesn't automatically lead to the other. Okay, so bad idea number 3. Platforms automatically improve productivity. Is our platforms kind of a big deal around here as well, like platform engineering, internal developer platforms, all this, the dev portals, that kind of stuff? Yeah, I got one person. Okay, maybe not so much. I find this very trendy. Okay, so a platform, the purpose of a platform is that it's intended to reduce the cost of effort. So, like, presumably, it's going after the bottom of this equation. Platforms are mostly not intended to improve impact. They're just to make things cheaper to do. Okay, that's basically the idea. They do this by consolidating costs and by reusing using capabilities. This picture, I'm trying to describe this. So if I had like 3 teams, they all needed the same, or they're all using a same capability. So I just call this capability foo. If I consolidate, it means I only have to pay licensing once. I only have to maintain it once. I don't have to update it once because I'm sharing it. If I split, if they just did their own, then we're doing that 3 times. So consolidation, that's how I get some cost improvement because I just only have to do those things once. The other aspect is I have a new team shows up. They want the same capability. Now they don't have to build it because I have a shared one in the platform. So those are the 2 angles you take. Theoretically, this is what platforms are supposed to do, and then magically, hey, productivity all over the place. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. So I don't know if people experience this thing like you're just migrating all the time. So, hey, yeah, I got a shared service. You got to update to the next version for security or whatever reason. And then you go, oh, okay, fine, we have to do this. Okay, now we're done with migration, which took forever, and now we're going to get back to building features. Oh, sorry, there's another migration coming because it took too long to do the first one, so now you're going to the next one. And this never ends because you're not just doing one shared service, you're doing a lot of shared services. And it's just like an unending upgrade cycle. And you go, hey, why did I get all the shared services? I don't actually build anything. I'm just upgrading my shared services. This shared thing, so I don't have to build it, but the thing that's provided is not good enough. So it doesn't actually allow me to do what I want to do. So instead of not just, hey, this thing is cheaper because I don't have to build it myself, but now it's like, now it's starting to shape what you are even targeting from an impact perspective because you're sticking to something that the platform is allowing, making cheap. Okay. Now, if this happens too much, you're not necessarily more productive because now your impact is going down, even if your cost is going down. So the ratio doesn't work out. So something you got to watch out for. Okay. Another thing is when I have a platform team, a platform area, this can become a bottleneck. So if there's any overhead whatsoever working with a shared team to get something, I have to kind of multiply that by every request that's happening, and it can overwhelm that team. So all of a sudden you go, hey, I have the shared thing, so I don't have to build myself, but now I have to wait for them to respond to the request to get that thing. So now I'm bottlenecking. So theoretically, you would say, hey, this should be faster, but only if the platform team doesn't become a bottleneck, because then all of a sudden you're increasing your lead times now because you're waiting. And this will just keep getting worse the more teams depend on this shared platform. Okay, so it can happen. So one way I think about how do you ensure that your platform, because even theoretically it should still work, and it does work sometimes, but what's the difference between a platform that actually improves productivity and one that does not? That's usually this question. If the teams had a choice, would they choose the platform service? And you always have to check that. If the answer is no, then you're doing something wrong and you have to do an adjustment. What that adjustment means, like there's a lot of different techniques, tricks there. But this is kind of the idea of what's the difference between one that actually improves productivity and which one doesn't. This is what I think when people say platform is a product, that's what they mean, or that's what they should mean. Our team's going to answer this question in the affirmative to say, oh yeah, if I had a choice, I would pick that because it makes me faster, or not. Okay, so summary here is platform is product. Platforms do improve productivity, but what I call the because I said so platforms, they don't actually improve productivity that much at all. I would actually say they might actually decrease productivity because they increase the cost of doing things. Ironic because you introduce them to try to decrease the cost. Okay. Bad idea number 4. AI automatically improves productivity. How many people have read an AI article in the last week? Maybe yesterday even. Maybe today. Maybe this morning. Maybe before you walked in here. Okay, so this is like everywhere. It's also interesting like to say, hey, who's making the claim and how fantastic is it? Now, same thing, like theoretically, AI improves productivity by reducing the cost of effort. For the most part, when people talk about AI improving productivity, they're really not talking about impacts per se. Sometimes people are, but most of the time they're saying, hey, AI improves productivity because it reduces the cost of effort in the same way that automation improves the cost of effort, except that AI's, like the idea is that AI presumably makes more things automatable. So things that were creative that we thought, oh, I could never automate that. Now I can because I have my fancy AI and I can now automate these creative things. Now, if that's true, then all of a sudden more things can be automated. It means I can reduce even more costs, which therefore means my productivity increases because I can just push the denominator further down. So great. AI improves productivity by automating creating tasks that were not previously automatable. However, back to the thing I mentioned before, you can always be more productive if it doesn't have to work. Okay, so one thing you always watch out for when people say these things is going, oh, okay, what was your example there? Oh, you produced a lot of stuff. Oh, my AI produced a lot of stuff. You never checked whether it worked. You just produced a lot of stuff. You're saying, oh, I'm so much more productive. I'm going, really? You never tested anything. You never, not like no customers using it. So got to be careful here because you can produce so much stuff. If you do this naively, you cannot be more productive. You can just create this illusion of productivity because you produce a lot of stuff. But it's not better. It's not more productive at all. We didn't need AI to do this too. I just have people just write things, no tests, and just go crazy. We had this before. It's just like, now I can do that faster. But being unproductive faster doesn't make you more productive. There's no, like, it doesn't, I'm super productive at being unproductive, and then it doesn't loop around to become productive. It doesn't work that way. Okay. Now this is, I don't know if people have read there's a DORA report for 2024. I don't know if people read that. They're talking about what they found with some of the AI stuff. So what they found is because AI allowed the respondents to produce a lot more code in the same amount of time, so they produced a lot of code, they would tend to do larger batch sizes. So before they had smaller releases, all of a sudden the releases would get bigger because they could produce so much so fast. So they got, oh, wow, I don't need to do smaller releases. I'll just do bigger stuff because I can produce things so quickly. Which we know the bigger releases were riskier and they tended to break more often. So effectively kind of lost the discipline of small release, small batch development stuff because they were kind of fooled by the seemingly productivity increase of the AI stuff. Now, if they just stayed disciplined and said, hey, I'm going to do this and I'm going to keep the thing small, they probably would have been more productive, but they got sort of suckered here. So kind of have this logic here. So AI makes you more productive, or feels like it. Being more productive makes you more confident. So you go, oh, I'm more confident because now I got this thing and it helps me out. Now, because you're more confident, you take larger steps, and taking larger steps makes you slower, more prone to create instability. So AI makes you less productive. Now, there's this kind of weird trap here, and it's just that choice there, essentially overconfidence, created that trap. So it's something you have to watch out for, especially with a lot of the hype where people say, hey, this AI is magical and can do all this stuff. Like once you go there and you believe that, then you start to make mistakes. So you kind of lose the discipline. Just got to watch out for that. There's another aspect here too, which I still see this, and this was hard. I don't even know how to resolve this. You have a lot of junior, especially newer engineers. They rely on the LLM a lot. So large language model, generative AI stuff. They rely on it a lot to complete tasks, and they never really develop the expertise. This is not. I don't think it's it's not guaranteed for this to happen, but there's a tendency for this to happen. They don't really understand what they're doing. They're just doing a lot of copy paste from ChatGPT windows. Okay, which means if they don't actually know how things work, they never become a senior engineer because they never really get what's going on. But eventually your senior engineers will retire. So all of a sudden you have this kind of new generation of people who never got there, and all your experienced people retire. So now you're in trouble. And now in the long run, your productivity, your organization will drop because nobody knows how anything works, and which creates issues at large scales, etc. So this is a thing. I don't actually know how to solve this one, but it's like everyone's talking about it too. Like, oh, hey, how are we gonna deal with this? So this is kind of thing about when we look at this stuff, we don't say, hey, even spiking productivity in a very short time period is actually not that difficult. Doing that sustained over time, that's harder. So even again, a competent CEO, senior leader, when they're talking productivity, they're not. Hopefully, they're not just thinking quarter by quarter, because you're probably not going to survive. But if they're thinking longer term, saying, "Hey, how does this organization stay successful in the long run?" Then you go, "Okay, our moves now can't just be the immediate productivity; it has to be the long run productivity." Okay, so I know the whole thing here is because I don't want to say like the AI tools aren't useful, interesting to learn. It's just that they're not magic. It's not magic, so don't treat it like magic. You have to assess productivity based on actual impact and costs, not based on. Is vibes like a phrase that people use here? Vibes. People talk about vibe coding and stuff like that. Yeah, don't rely. Even if you try that style, assess it on actual impact and costs. Don't assess it on, oh, that felt great, that looks cool. That's not equivalent to productivity. It's almost like if you can imagine someone says, hey, CEO asks you, how do you know that was more productive? Because it looks cool. Like, that's not the answer you want to be giving. Okay, so to summarize, 4 bad ideas about productivity. 1, you can't measure it. 2, developer experience is equivalent to productivity. 3, platforms automatically improve productivity. And 4, AI automatically improves productivity. So I said that instead of you can't measure productivity, you want to respond with talking about productivity based on impact, not effort, not output. I should say it's actually best to be able to link all of that together to say, hey, this is how the effort links to output, links to outcome, links to impact. So you can talk about how that entire logic works, which can be useful because sometimes there's time delays for things. But that's how you want to talk about it. You don't answer with you can't measure productivity. Okay, second thing is you want to pay attention to both developer experience and productivity, not one or the other, because one doesn't automatically lead to the other. And definitely there are things that feel great at the time and they are not more productive. And platforms improve productivity, but because I said so, platforms do not. So this idea that if the platform is improving productivity, the team should be choosing that service out of their own free will. Reality is they may not have that option, but you just pretend, and that's how you want to assess, right? If they could pretend that they had the choice, and would they choose it? So you want to check. Okay, and finally, AI is not magic. Assess it based on actual impact and costs, not based off of vibes. Okay. So again, this is the scenario. If you can imagine, you're in the scenario, your CEO, your leader asks you to help improve productivity. And I want you to think about how do you respond, and hopefully what I discussed gives you some ideas of what kind of things that you can bring or frame what you are doing to answer that question. Okay, that is it. And I'm curious what your thoughts are. And especially if you've dealt with this before and what you did. Should we get like a microphone?
No. Hi, Jason. Nice thoughts. Mine is around the platform engineering. I think it's in the modern world, it's like 50-50 because I see the point you're making and the diagram you shown earlier where it becomes a bottleneck. But at the same time, there are organizations where they do platform as a product and platform as a service. It becomes a self-serving model for autonomous teams. So that kind of improves the productivity in a great way. And also on a different aspect, from the team topologies, thoughts, platform is not just the engineering side of things. For example, in an organization, when you have a, say, I don't know, HR application or a finance application, that also can be viewed as a platform and offered to every employee as a self-serving platform. So there are two sides to that.
Because there's a little bit of, let's say an employee service thing, like let's say you had something that would give you your benefits stuff, like, oh, I go somewhere and it's a shared thing. I don't really want to, like, let's say you had to do that by hand, you had to talk to whatever. And instead you could just say, oh, I'll just do a lookup here and then I'll show you your stuff. And then that could be a shared thing. And there's probably some productivity gain there. I don't usually talk about that so much. I just lost my screen there. That's fine. Because like from usually that productivity improvement is not that big, depending on the organization. It could be a lot depending. But like here, I'm emphasizing more the product development side of it. Now, I would say though that there is an elevation of, if we look at, like, say, payment, right? So I could say payment I want to happen the same way for the entire organization, because we might have legal things, compliance, policy stuff that we want to make sure it's the same. And I don't necessarily want everyone to build their own, right? So I go, okay, I'm going to do that. Now, it's still a productivity thing, because you go, anyone who's going to build it, you would check, like, hey, this is back to if they could do a bad payment system very quick, but if I want the good one across the board quickly, then I have to do it a particular way. Now, what's interesting is sometimes you realize that you don't need to have them the same across different areas. So some things that become like, hey, we have to do this the same way. Like one big one, sometimes controversial, people say, hey, I need this like customer data the same way everywhere. And if you look closely, sometimes you go, no, I don't. This group, their customers never overlap whatsoever with this other group, because they're selling to, let's say, business customers. These people are selling to mass consumers. They never overlap. Which they're interested in, even the attributes that they're interested in aren't even the same. So I don't want to couple them, because once I do, like I'd say, oh, it's cheaper to have one customer store. I'm going, but you just made one or both of them slower for no reason, right? Like it doesn't make sense. So there's this kind of, you have to pay attention to that. I don't know if that sort of covers what you're talking about as well. Yeah.
One question from me. So I work for India's largest one of the IT companies, and basically when these customers ask us to improve productivity, we usually suggest them the outcome-based models. So outcome-based models have got different variants, and people understand it different way. So in agile projects, when we manage, they say that we try to have some levers, improve on them, we set up a baseline. And also sometimes when we have agile projects, we try to see how the value after the release has happened has given to the user or the end user. So what do you feel the outcome-based model should be like? I mean, people think it in a different way for improving productivity. What's your idea about the outcome-based model?
Ideally, I like to talk like this. I'll grab this one. I'd like to talk like this. So not just like this is from you're building a product. It gets a little bit more complicated because I'm talking about outcome here in terms of, usually when you build something, I'm doing things, I'm building stuff, I create features, some kind of output. every time I'm building something, I'm trying to cause someone to change their behavior some way, right? That is not always the case. There are sometimes I'm optimizing a business process and I'm getting a machine to behave a particular. Like I just want to say, hey, it takes you this much CPU cost to do something, especially if I'm using cloud stuff, and I want you to cost less. So I can do stuff that aren't customer behavior change, but mostly when we're doing product development, I'm going to build something that causes a particular behavior change, which I believe will lead to impact the organization. And I won't be tracking all of them. So the reason why I need to track all of it is because there's a time lag here. I could say I build a feature, I got someone to behave a particular way. I don't know, like I might take a year or so, let's say maybe months or a year before I can actually see that show up. Because maybe I'm saying this will cause them to stick around longer. And I go like, I don't know. I have to wait to see this. So if it's a retention play, I have to wait to assess that. Or even if I say, hey, I believe this thing will cause better conversion, I have to wait to see that, oh, does it convert? And then they drop faster? I don't know. So there's this kind of lagging thing going on. So when you're looking at like trying to understand, hey, outcome stuff, even though like the high level one is just, hey, let's pay attention to this, but you kind of have to get into the details of what does that mechanism look like. This is part of the, like, this is why the thing I would encourage is like when we're doing stuff, it's like getting better to understanding how what you're doing, like not just, oh, I do this thing, so therefore simple cause effect. It's more understand that system that creates that impact, or at least what you think it is. Get better and better and better at that. Like that's the idea. Any other questions? One there.
Thank you for an amazing session. There was one, the number 2 bad idea was developer experience is equivalent to productivity. And
Yep.
there is something you said about good experience is not equivalent to productivity.
Yes.
So usually companies, they try to provide better facilities and some
Yeah.
benefits, extensive snack program and many things
Yep.
to keep folks motivated. So it is contrasting. I mean, I don't know what they have in their mind, but I think they feel that motivated folks will give in their 100%.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I want to know your thoughts on that.
Well, one, the people who, it's funny, people with that budget, they don't talk to the people who look at like outcomes. They don't. So that's a problem, right? You go, yeah, no, we'll get this arcade machine, we'll get some pinball machines, and then somehow magically this will make people more productive. But they'll never check, because that's someone else's budget, kind of thing. This is actually a little bit what Björk is talking about. It doesn't make any sense, right? Like say, oh, you think this will do it? Well, we'll check, right? You should find out. Don't just throw it in there because you have an office budget, so spend it. Kind of, it doesn't make any sense. In my personal experience, because I used to work some places that had a lot of that stuff, I'm going, I didn't have time to spend on that. Like the people who did usually didn't do a lot. Now I don't want to say though those are bad, because there is some aspect of socializing, connecting, and all this kind of stuff. But you kind of almost want to check, right? You say, because there will be a point where I'm going, oh, it's no longer doing that. Right? This is just like it's there for show. Like we always had complaints about, hey, this is just for show. Like I need another meeting room. And now it's like that's some kind of plant farm thing. Like I don't know, nobody goes in here. It's like a meditation room. Nobody meditates, but it looks cool, and it's kind of back to this vibe thing. You have to look at. Not just because it's supposed to work, but look at whether it actually works.
Adding on to what you explained about the developer experience, one is that motivational experience that she talked about and
Yeah.
explained. Could it also be something like an intellectual experience? Not everybody likes the freebies and the goodies. Something that I'm working on something great, At least I have a lot of young folks in my team who want to be on the latest and the greatest things that they are doing.
Oh yeah. That's not a new problem though. Young people always think that, oh, I'm going to try the latest stuff. All the old experienced people saying, stop doing the new stuff. All of it sucks. Which is all stereotypical, but that kind of does happen. It's not a new thing. It's like that's always been the case where when you're less experienced, you're kind of more prone, in general, not always, but in general, you're more prone to be distracted by new shiny things. And then as you get more mature, you tend to be more jaded and think life is horrible. Which, yeah, that's in general, not just for work. But like, and you have to kind of balance it, because I would say it's not always the case that the new thing is worse. Sometimes the new thing is actually better. And it's not always the case that the old thing is worse, or not always the case that the old thing is better. Sometimes the old things are horrible, and they just got used to it. So you kind of have to pay attention there. So like this is actually why it's nice to usually good to have a mix. So we were talking just at the initial kickoff here, like when we say, hey, diversity and all that, like one aspect is mix it up, because there actually is no perfect perspective here. You want kind of a mixture, because otherwise you'll have a tendency to have a strong bias toward one of them, and you won't be correct. It won't be 100%, which means you'll be off. So a mix helps you detect those kind of breaks. I don't know if that kind of addresses your question. What was your? It's, yeah. There's a stylistic choice here. You can be a company that says we only use tried and tested technology. We will wait for other things to come up. You will have a greater risk of missing the boat on something coming up, right? Like if something could come very rapidly, and then you'll get undercut because you're not prepared to do that. On the other side, you can waste a lot of time playing around with things that go nowhere, and you're not focused enough on creating impact to customers. You're playing with too many toys. So both of those failure modes exist. So in general, because I can't speak to the organization, it depends on. I like how Bjarte talks about like the volatility of your environment controls this. So if you are in an environment which is not that volatile, you may not want to necessarily play around as much, because the advantage is probably more to optimizing on some more stable stuff, and you kind of do that. You can still, though, I would still invest something, because maybe you can find something that gives you a jump. But if you are in a very volatile environment, it's actually much more like you might actually want to try lots of different things, because it's more likely that you'll find an edge there. But everything's case by case. It's really hard to say, hey, here's a general answer, because there is no universal answer to that. It is, I guess the idea is that you want to be making that choice based on the environment you find yourself in. So use the external, you're talking about the external coherence is how I would say that's the way to think about it.
I kind of want to touch upon the fourth bad idea of AI. So I literally see the junior developers becoming more reliant and dependent on the AI models for getting the solutions for the problems.
Yep.
So, but on the contrary, if you see, for example, when I started my career, I used to write my code in a notepad. So we didn't even have a lot of IDEs initially.
Yeah.
So we had to know the technology as a knowledge, right? So as years went on, even the senior developers, what we have right now, so they also use the capabilities of internet. They Google the problem.
Yeah. Yep.
Is it possible that in the future, so more than increasing the capability of technological knowledge, people will have to look at increasing the capability.
Yeah, there's
capability of knowing how to use the AI.
Sure.
Like how internet evolved and the developers are using the.
Yeah. So right now we've already seen stuff like this before, right? Very few people know how compilers work. But I shouldn't say very. percentage-wise, it's much smaller percentage know the details of both how compilers work, how the fundamental hardware, like how that's structured. We just recently, like even how basic networking stuff, which they really should, because we're doing a lot of distributed systems, but just basic stuff, because they're relying on all these frameworks and all this kind of stuff on top. Right now, that's kind of this phenomena too, right? So would I say, like, I would say there's always going to have to be someone who's going to need to know this, because especially at scale, you go hard enough, you do complicated, complex enough stuff, you're going to make contact with something where you go, oh, I don't know what's going on. There's a paper, which maybe I'll try to find it and share it. They talked about, I don't know if it's a paper or it's someone's blog, but he's talking about verifiability being the limit. No matter what you do, like no matter how much this amplifies your capability, at some point you need to be able to check that it's doing the right thing. And if you don't understand how to do that, you're going to get into trouble. So somehow you go, hey, even with this, like maybe the future setup looks different, but we still say, hey, how do I validate that? Now, here I am assuming that it's human in the loop. Like even if I had an LLM checking another LLM and checking another LLM, someone at the end is like a person going, okay, that's right. How do I create that person? Like, how do we ensure that within your own organization? How does this work? Like, it's just something. This is why I'm not sure what the answer is. It's like you just have to watch, pay attention. Like, it's not guaranteed that it just works out like it always does. That's not actually true.
It was wonderful having you there. Thank you.
Thank you.